I'm looking forward to the presentation, and without any further ado, I would like to give the floor, I think, to Connor.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Geert. So good morning, everyone. Our team project, we were working with the Youth Olympic Games Department at the IOC, and our topic was on youth retention in organized and competitive sports. For our team, it was Pavla, Josh, Patrice, Lucas, and myself. For today's presentations, what we'd like to do is I'll quickly introduce the topic, go over how we approach the project, and then we'll all go into some of the research and findings we had from our case studies of 5 different countries, and then Josh will wrap it up with some learnings and recommendations. So to start, youth retention. It's become a very popular topic in the sports world over the past couple of decades. It's been identified around the world because of kids dropping out of sports at certain age groups and in general declining participation rates in many sports. With the Youth Olympic Games shift to now being, in addition to an elite sports tournament, also a project very focused on legacy and how they can impact host countries and host communities, youth retention is one of the main objectives of the Youth Olympic Games Department. In terms of consequences on society for youth dropping out of sports, obviously we know about the unhealthy, obese problems around the world, so this can be a big consequence of inactive children. And then of course they lose out on all the good benefits from sports, educational benefits, professional benefits, psychological benefits. In terms of our overall objective, it was just to gain a better understanding of the topic of youth retention on a more global level. And the way we decided to approach the project was the first phase we did some research to see what was out there in terms of current literature. The second phase we did 5 different case studies on 5 different countries across the world. Then our third stage we did some analysis and ultimately provided some recommendations. In terms of limitations, data is tough to find on these things, and the data that does exist is mainly based on developed countries in the Western world. And even the existing data can be questionable in terms of reliability sometimes, because often funding for sports programs is based on participation levels. So, of course, this can get complicated. In terms of the 5 countries we chose, we studied Canada, Argentina, the Czech Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, and South Korea. We chose these countries. We wanted to cover 5 continents. Obviously, myself, Patrice, and Pavla were from Canada, the Czech Republic, and Cote d'Ivoire. And then in terms of Argentina and Korea, Argentina they cover South America. They're a strong sporting country, and they're hosting the 2018 Youth Olympic Games in Buenos Aires. And then Korea, of course, they're hosting the 2018 Winter Olympics. And again, they're quite successful on the international sporting scene. In terms of our case studies, here's some of the interviews and research we were able to conduct. So we were able to get some good interviews with some ministries of sports in various countries, some Olympic committees, some national federations, and a variety of other sports organizations. In terms of how we decided to look at the topic of youth retention, in our research we found a model developed by a man named Troy Kirkham. He did a study for the Australian government on youth retention strategies in Canada, the US, and the UK. And basically he sorted the reasons for dropout and strategies for youth retention into these 9 categories seen here. For the purposes of our project, we decided to narrow it down a little bit further and group some of these together. So our 5 topics that we looked at were fun, play, and motivation relating to the participant, parents' opportunity and access, which is quite a big category, the role of the coach and the relationship between the coach and the participant, talent development practices, and then finally the structure of sport. And to start us off on these topics, I'm going to pass it on to Lucas.
Thank you, Connor. So we talk about the first theoretical concept, fun, play, and motivation. First of all, fun is the number 1 reason for youth to participate in organized sport. The challenge there is that there's a different notion of fun between the adults who organize and implement the sports programs and the youth who actually participate in those programs. Then we have play, which is the primary reason of youth why they they like a sport or not, and we see that there is less and less time spent in playing and more time in competing. And those two notions, they are the main drivers for intrinsic motivation, and we see nowadays that there is a shift from intrinsic to extrinsic motivation, participating to win or for pleasing to parents, and this is clearly a threat for the long-term participation of youth in competitive and organized sport. We have created those graphics to visualize the countries according to the different theoretical concepts. We have done that in terms of importance of reason for dropout and the robustness of the related strategies. And this helped us to identify the key points for every theoretical concept. So now for the concept fun, play, motivation, we see that there are two different clusters. One, Argentina, Canada, and the Czech Republic, where it is highly important as a reason for dropout, and accordingly there are pretty robust strategy in place. For Côte d'Ivoire and the Republic of Korea, it is less important. Now if you pick out two countries, Czech Republic and Canada, we see that for both, fun is the primary reason for dropout, but they have a different approach. The Czech Republic, they really try to create peer communities around the sporting events. They try to involve schools, the entourage of the athletes, and they also try to create new sports formats. Canada, they implement motivation and enjoyment practices in many different ways. And for example, they integrate that in their long-term athlete development model or in the national coaching certification programs. So that's it for the first concept. I pass the word to Pavla for the next one.
Thank you, Lucas. And I will talk about the next category, which links really well to what Lucas was just saying now, and it's about parents and opportunity and access. And indeed, we have seen throughout the research and also throughout our interviews that parents are the key motivators, and they would be also the key drivers to bring children to participate in organized sports. And it's a really wide category because apart from parents in terms of motivation as well as socioeconomic status, we looked at the opportunity and access. So when we studied Côte d'Ivoire or Argentina, there were other issues such as lack of infrastructure or access. So look, the cluster here comparing to Lucas's chart was very much topic that is super important for all the countries that we studied. And as well, there are strategies that have been put into place to address this issue in terms of retention. So if we look at the first example of Canada, it is a number one reason as well or is definitely the priority in terms of why children quit sports is because there is lack of financial resources in the family. So 1 out of 3 children in Canada do not play sports because of this issue. And we interviewed Get Sport Canada, and they're addressing it by providing grants and funding in order to cover registration fees or equipment fees. The other issue that I mentioned in terms of reasons for dropout or non-participation per se in Côte d'Ivoire would be that simply there is no facility that could offer an organized sport to the children. And another interesting topic that Lucas touched upon a little bit was the approach of the parents, and we see in Republic of Korea, for instance, that there's a lot of pressure by parents to achieve academic results, and maybe sports participation is put a little bit behind. And Czech Republic as well, there's some negative pressure by parents in terms of success and achievements, and this can be highly demotivating for children. And I will pass on now to Patrice, who will talk a little bit more about coaching.
Okay, thank you, Pavla.
Right.
So, okay, I'm going to talk about the coach, the relationship between the participants and the coach relationship. Actually, we found out that athletes are influenced a lot by the coaches. So the relation between the youth athletes and the coach is very key in terms of retention in the sport or dropping out of the sport. So why? Because the coach actually is the one who has direct access to the athletes, and he can influence and shape the athlete. But also, the coach is the one who implements or executes the model, the development model, and the methodology of the sport. A lot of times, coaches think that they come with their own understanding about the sport, their own motivation, and the metric to measure success. But actually, they should focus on what the athlete wants and what the athletes usually they desire and require. They want to have respect and encouragement. They would like to have a positive role modeling. They want also to have knowledge of sport. They want also to have constant and clear communication. And of course, they want somebody who can listen to their concern. The reality in terms of youth sport is that a lot of volunteers are involved, and while they have good intention, but they lack the knowledge and the pedagogy to deal with young athletes. And statistics have shown that, for example, fewer than 1 in 5 of coaches lack knowledge of pedagogy, and fewer than 1 to 3 lack the knowledge in terms of what is specific to sport and the tactics. So we found out that if the coach is knowledgeable, increased by 5 times the retention within the sport. And the statistic dropping out is 5% for a knowledgeable coach, while it's 26% of dropping for somebody who doesn't have the knowledge. So let's see how it does affect the different case studies that we have. Okay, if you look at the chart, we found out that we have 2 groups in terms of reason for dropping out. We have Korea, Argentina, and Côte d'Ivoire. They have a mild reason for dropping out, while dropping out in terms of Canada and Czech Republic is a concern. In terms of strategy, Côte d'Ivoire and Canada are doing most of the effort in terms of trying to resolve it. For example, Côte d'Ivoire has a very good coaching program in terms of education, in terms of football and taekwondo. We have a lot of statistics, but those are the best organization. And for example, in taekwondo, they were able to get 2 medals for the first time, 1 gold and 1 bronze. So this is altogether 3 medals. So because they have actually a good, excellent coaching program. And Canada, created in 1974, the National Certification Coaching Program is one of the best in the world. And the program is based on LTAD, which is a long-term athlete development model. And the focus is on motivation and retention. So we see that coach play a big role in terms of retention. So now I'm going to give the floor to Mr. Josh. And he's going to talk about talent development.
Thanks, Patrice. So I'm talking about talent development. So what is talent development? Well, we understand it as any structure, practice, or mechanism that is aiming to nurture athletes towards an elite level. Relating this to dropout in terms of youth retention, there are themes such as the idea that more practice definitely equals better performance, which can lead to overtraining, which can lead to injury or lack of fun, which can lead to dropout. There are also other themes such as early specialization, specializing in one sport at a very young age. In terms of what we actually found from the countries, talent development was most relevant in Canada and Czech Republic, and less so in the Republic of Korea, Argentina, and Côte d'Ivoire. Talking about 2 key points, Canada is probably the model and the example for a strategy to try and combat this. Connor and Patrice have already mentioned long-term athlete development, which is effectively a model that takes coaches step by step through what athletes or young athletes should be doing at each stage in terms of training and play, practice, to improve. It is good because it recognises that 99% of the athletes probably won't make it, but that improving their skills gives them the tools for life to enjoy and participate in their sport. The drawbacks from this in the literature are that it sometimes focuses too much on physical development and leaves out things such as psychological and social factors. The second key point I'd like to mention is funding in the Czech Republic and Republic of Korea. We saw this as a reason for dropout in the past because there was such a focus on funding elite sports historically that this is money that's going to sport, which is not going to general participants, but going to the elite. But this has been changing within the last couple of decades, which we believe is, to some degree, a strategy in changing the funding from elite to general participation amongst youth. I'm just going to pass to Connor, who's going to talk about the structure of sport and the other reasons and strategies we found.
Josh. Okay, so the last category we talked about was the structure of sports. So all these categories that we've been talking about, the motivation, the fun play, the talent development, the coaching, ultimately the structure kind of has to implement these and pull them all together. So when we talk about structure of sport, are they offering options to all levels of motivation, skill, competition, or are they only offering to the elite? Are there easily accessible programs for all these levels? Is there funding for youth sports? And then finally, one interesting aspect was how the club and school systems work together. In a lot of countries, they often work in competition with each other. So, and this ultimately is not in the athlete's best interest because it can lead to overuse, injuries, burnout, and ultimately dropping out from sports. In terms of some interesting strategies we found for the structure of sport, in Argentina, they have this program, the AISTS program, which was implemented in the lead up to the 2018 Youth Olympic Games. And basically the idea behind the program is to expand the influence of sports in the country beyond just the major cities and reach more of the rural areas and provide them with programming and also help to identify talent outside of just the main metropolis areas. In Côte d'Ivoire, there is a lack of funding, especially when you consider they have a very high youth population compared to the other countries. So serving this youth population can be a problem with lack of funding, but they're introducing new sport laws in 2018, and a big part of that is so that these sports organizations can efficiently use funds and better serve these youth. And then lastly, the Czech Republic is doing something very interesting. The Ministry of Sport has implemented a program where they are starting school-based clubs. And this is great because it is very accessible to lots of children. And they also have these school-based clubs going and competing with club competitions, club tournaments. So it's a great way of integrating and getting the two systems to work together. And then last, we did find some reasons for dropout and some strategies kind of outside these five categories we had. So some interesting ones are, in Korea, online game addiction is a big problem and just the sheer hours that can be put into it. And this is viewed as an important reason for why kids stop playing sports. They're just trying to introduce laws to limit the amount of hours kids can play on the internet, especially at night. A number of organizations really emphasize the role that sporting heroes and role models can play in this, and inspiring participation and continued participation. In all the countries we looked at, there is a gender participation gap, and also you see females dropping out at a lot higher rates. There's an organization in Canada called the Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sport, and they're trying to address some of these issues. And lastly is the role of major sporting events. As we've talked about Argentina a bunch of times, they're really using the Youth Olympic Games in 2018 as a way to address some of the problems with their youth sports system. All right, I'll pass it on to Josh to wrap it up.
Thanks. So I'm going to be the last to speak, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we learned and kind of wrap everything up. The main 2 points we learned were firstly that every country varied drastically in why kids dropped out and what strategies existed to combat these. Secondly, the reasons we identified from the literature were prevalent and relevant in each country, as you can see. If not, every country would have been at the bottom left of the graph, or our visualization, which was not the case. We analysed each country individually, and after a long discussion together, we came up with 7 recommendations, which are quite general. I'm going to briefly touch upon 4 of them, talking about what we learned and what we recommend. So firstly, as Connor's already mentioned, data and statistics within youth retention or even sports participation is hard to find and sometimes unreliable, and it's very difficult to compare as each country and sport can measure them in different ways. So we believe finding a better way of tracking youth dropout and making this comparable between countries is a good way to benchmark and learn whether strategies are working or not. Secondly, point number 3, each country's structure and which organizations are actively trying to solve the problem of youth dropout varies as well between country to country. In Canada, there are specific organizations trying to solve one particular problem for access, for example, and cost. whereas in other countries, the Ministry of Culture, Sport and Tourism are more involved, or the Olympic committees themselves. So we believe more collaboration and communication between these organisations could lead to more effective and faster move towards retaining more youth. And finally, the last two, leveraging, we learned that in terms of events, there's no real evidence that hosting an event itself can inspire youth to participate or stay in sports. More so, events can be used to leverage the strategies that could be more effective in retaining youth. So we believe hosting these events can be a way of reflecting upon, addressing and improving these youth retention strategies. In terms of further research, we believe it's such a complicated issue that more research should be done on a case-by-case basis. And we believe more could maybe be done in terms of what international sports organisations could do, such as AISTS, in terms of what their role is in trying to retain youth so they have power in their sports. That's it. I'd just like to say thank you to our clients, Philippe, Mathieu, and Garrett, for all the time, support, and effort they put into achieving our project. So I think I speak for all of us when I say we learned a lot throughout it. I hope our presentation gave you some insight into that. Thanks for coming and thanks for listening, and we're welcome to any questions.